This is the Rich Dad Radio Show. The good news and bad news about money. Here's Robert Kiyosaki.
Hello. It's Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. And today I have a very, very special guest in studio, which I like. And he's a dear, he's not old, but he's been a friend for a long time. We met him through a gentleman named Richard Russell, and we've continued on. And we've never stopped our campaign to bring some kind of enlightenment to this world of money and the world. And so our guest today is Chris Martenson. And Chris, we're going to be talking about a very volatile subject, so please don't get me censored, because we're now a totalitarian state. We've lost our freedom of speech here. But we're going to be talking about this thing called COVID and Fauci and all this other stuff. So stay tuned, because if a drone strike hits this building, it's because Chris Martenson's here. But he's been a revolutionary like Richard Russell was, and we're spurning other revolutionaries. That's what we're doing. We're saying, screw this. We're not going to put up with it. So, Chris, would you mind giving us your, especially your academic pedigree, because it qualifies you to speak on COVID. I'm not qualified to speak on it.
Oh, well, you are, and it's great to be here, and it's wonderful to be in studio with you here today.
Thank you.
We do. We go way back, and I think it's our love of learning that bonded us, right? The first time I met you was because Richard Russell had handed you a book I wrote,
right?
And you read it, which is a great trait. A lot of people just collect books, never read them. You read them, and then you wanted to have a session with your workers to talk through it. So that was it. It was right here in Scottsdale, I think, probably 10 years ago now.
Right.
At least. I'd have to
a long time more than that.
Yeah. So my background, I have a PhD in pathology from Duke University. And what that means is that I entered medical school at Duke with all the first year medical students. I went through the first 2 years with all the medical students. So everything's the same, taking all the same classes, doing anatomy, all that stuff. At year 3, they wandered off and put the stethoscopes around their neck and started practicing at doctor. And I went off and was doing things like autopsies and pathology, histology, things like that. So, and then I did a couple of years of postdoc work as well. And I was working on basic cell biology. And my subspecialty was toxicology. So that's really the study of how things injure cells, systems, and all of that. So that's my background there. And then I went on and got an MBA from Cornell and went into business for a period of time. So I think I can speak sort of all the different worlds out there.
Because when I went through Richard Russell, it was about investing in finance and markets.
Yeah.
And you were talking at that time about the debt and all this. So that's what really your ability to write and paint up pictures. Could you give us the story about if you drop one drop of water? It's so graphic.
Yeah. So I'm a translator of things. So I love giving credit where credit is due. This story actually comes from Albert Bartlett, who is a professor of mathematics at Boulder. And he talked about it in terms of bacteria, and I looked at his examples, and it's a really important concept. So it's about exponential growth, right? And so exponential growth is this thing that everybody should know about, but none of us do really.
Right.
And it sounds like math. And here's the thing. We're humans, so we're not wired to understand exponential growth, right? It's like, or nonlinear. Like nonlinear just confuses us. Imagine, somebody throws a baseball, you probably can catch it. It's traveling linear, but if you slip on ice on your front stoop, man, that's going to surprise you, right? Boom, down you go, because you fall as a square function. It's not, so it's math, right? So here's the thing. Exponential growth, we're surrounded by it. We have to know it, but we don't get it. So I use this example. It goes like this. Imagine I have a magic eyedropper, and it's magic because when I put a drop of water in your hand, every minute, that drop of water is going to double, right? So I put a drop of water in your hand. After 1 minute, you have 2 drops. And after 2 minutes, you have 4 drops. After like 5 minutes, you can fill a thimble up. So that's the pace of growth. So here's the example. We're all going to go to a stadium, the biggest stadium you can imagine, like the biggest one you've ever been to, right? Holds 100,000 people. And we're going to make that stadium watertight. I'm going to handcuff you to the highest row of bleacher seats, and there you are. So at 12 o'clock, on any given day, there you are, handcuffed, and I put one of these magic drops of water down. And the question is, how long do you have to escape from your handcuffs? Right? And I've given this talk, I've said this to probably 10,000 people, I don't know, lots of audiences. And there's maybe 1 or 2 people out of 500 or 600 that get close, but most people think something like, oh, I don't know, it's going to take years, months, days. And the answer is it takes 50 minutes to fill that stadium up, right? 50 minutes. So let's imagine that you're at a stadium that's twice as big as any stadium I've even conceived of. Well, then it would take 51 minutes, right? Because it doubles. Right. That isn't the important question. Here's the important question. At what time would your stadium still be 97% empty space? And how many people would realize the seriousness of their predicament? And the answer is 45 minutes into this thing, it's still 97% empty space. It's that last 5 minutes. It's all over. It goes from 3% to 6 to 12 to 25, 50, 100. We're done. Boom, out. And the reason that's important is we have exponential debt in our system. The Federal Reserve is creating exponential amounts of money. We have an exponential loss of water from the aquifers. We're having exponential increases in the use of energy. We're just surrounded by it. And most people don't know it. And unfortunately, it's our so-called leaders. I'm putting up air quotes here if people can't see leaders. They don't get it at all. And they're pretending we live in this linear world, but we don't. And so that's why I tell that story, because I want us to understand where we are in this moment in time. It's a really incredible moment in human history, not American history, like human history.
So what's interesting about Chris, I meet him, we met as financial guys, and then this thing COVID pops up, which spurred me to write this book here, the Capitalist Manifesto.
I can't wait to read that.
Me too. I'm supposed to get some paper for it. But it started with this book here, the Communist Manifesto. This is talk about exponential. This is about 50 pages.
Yeah.
It took me about 500 pages to explain it. Because this little book has had such profound impact on the world. So I started...
So what's in there? What's the impact?
Well, yeah, I don't have time right now, so I wrote this book. But it took that long. Well, but I realized my family are Marxist. They don't know it because there's no financial education in our schools. So I meet you as finance guys.
Yeah.
Right. And then your evolution, you went with Adam Taggart, and you guys were doing financial shows. Mm-hmm. Then COVID broke out.
Yeah. And
you started speaking out.
Right.
And then what happened?
Well, I honestly had to dust off. It had probably been 20 years since I'd been in science. And it turns out I didn't forget it. I've got a pretty good brain for some things, and science is one of them. And so I started reading as much as I could. But I remember I was tracking for no good reason. I was just tracking that there was this outbreak in China. And then on January 23rd, I had to send out an alert to the world because on the 22nd, that night of, China ringed off the city of Wuhan. And I didn't know very much about the virus at that point, but I know something about the Chinese, which is they don't shut down a major industrial center unless they have a really serious reason for it. So that was my warning. So I sent out an alert to everybody. It probably took me about a week to figure out what we were up against truly. And then I started talking about COVID. Now, unfortunately, I was a little early. So this is like late January, early February.
I remember I was tracking you.
Yeah. So there are all these, like the Wall Street Journal's like, and the New York Times are like, it's just the flu, bro. And I'm like, nah, I'm pretty sure it's not. And I was, I knew a pandemic was coming, and I knew what I was up against because on February 5th, my wiki page, which had been up for 15 years, got taken down. A wiki editor said, this is a non-notable person. That's how they described me. And he's talking about stuff he doesn't know, and they described me as a conspiracy theorist, and that was it. And my page got taken down. And I said, uh-oh. Something else is going on here, right? Yeah.
And so then you and Adam were talking about stocks and stuff like that, but the sponsors of your show said they didn't want you talking about it, right?
Well, yeah, we ran into a lot of censorship beyond that, but I couldn't help it. I was producing a video a day for the first 6 months, I think, close to.
Way early.
Every single day. So this is like 30, 40, 50 minutes of material, fully researched. Like I taught at the college level, and I've had other professors say that basically what I was producing was a full course day every single day for 6 months. It was the hardest work I've done in a long time, and I was doing it because I needed to do it. I needed to get out there. The YouTube channel was demonetized right away, so it wasn't for money, but I felt it was really important to get this information out, so that's what I did.
And that's what kind of happened to me. I started this manifesto 2.5 years ago. And it sucked all the energy out of me. It's because I just kept going at it. Yeah. and I smelled a rat because on September 17, 2019, the repo market collapsed.
You remember that? I remember that.
I remember that clearly. I said, geez, something happened. Because the last time that happened was 2008. Because we're in the finance side. And then all of a sudden my friend calls me from Singapore. He says, hey, there's something going on in China. I went, being a suspicious mind, I said, well, you have the repo market collapse and something happens in China. Are they related? And that's when I started tracking you.
Yeah, so I'm a quick learner eventually. At first, I was all about this. This was like the virus. And now I'm looking back on it and I realized that I think I was duped for a while. I honestly think that China was sending out, remember, I didn't realize how much they controlled everything that comes out of there. So I wasn't aware that I'm consuming all this stuff. And there were these videos of people falling over in the street, just keeling over. And there were pictures of hallways full of dead people. So I thought that's what was coming, right? And now we know that I think the earliest version of that virus was worse. Of course, they get less bad over time. That's just the nature of viral evolution. So maybe that first alpha version was a little worse, but China was exporting fear to us, and we were buying it. I was buying it.
Right.
Right, I did. And now I'm so glad to hear you connect those dots, because now I look back and the repo market was blowing up in September. So COVID was the best thing that could have ever happened.
Exactly.
To a Federal Reserve that needed an out to print trillions.
It was a distraction.
Well, it sure worked out that way for them.
Yeah. And they could print.
I'm a coincidence theorist. I hate them.
and they could print more money then.
Not just some more money, the most we've ever seen.
I know. And so your eye drop theory just got to a bigger stadium.
You remember, you know this, right? So there was that at the end of 2020, it was like money had grown, money supply, money had grown 30% in a single year. The total supply of money, 30%.
So then you've gone off onto your crusade against. So what would you say you're doing now? You're talking about. I'm having a Biden moment, but.
Oh, Fauci say or
yeah.
So I'm perpetually out of step with wherever the mainstream media is. So at first I was warning and they were saying it was the flu, and now they're all the way trying to keep us in fear. The Omicron variant, which came out, and of course that blew up a lot of people's Thanksgivings because that was announced on Thanksgiving Day, right? And so that Friday that's when it blew up across. Oh my God! And there was all this stuff. So I was researching it as fast as I could. And the Omicron variant is actually one of the best things we could ever hope for. Right? It's very mild, highly transmissive. And by the way, the vaccines do nothing against it, right? Worse, actually, they accelerate its progression. But that's where we're at. And so now I find myself constantly still being censored and still running afoul of things. I'm one of the few people I know where I get emails and other communications where people say, hey, this doesn't happen to me on any other channel I'm on, but I was just unsubscribed from your YouTube channel or from your Twitter. So people get unfollowed or unsubscribed from my channels all the time. So this is a form of soft censorship. I've been hard censored a couple times, but I realize, well, I was just at Turning Point Network, and one of the producers there said, oh, can you tweet out the live show? Here it is. And so said, great, just send us my Twitter handle. So she's trying to find me. And I'm watching her do this, and she puts my whole name. It's at Chris Martinson. That's my Twitter handle. She puts it in, and Twitter says no results found. I have 85,000 followers, and Twitter told her that I didn't exist, right? That's the kind of censorship I'm up against these days. It's soft. It's probably nothing. It's in that Communist Manifesto. It's soft totalitarianism.
Well, one of the things that Marx said was that medicine was the archstone of communism.
And why would that be, the archstone?
Well, because that it's Obamacare and all that.
Yeah.
And so it was socialized medicine, and then comes communism. Stage 1, stage 2. So I always remember that. So I'm waiting for stage 2 to hit, and it happened, in my opinion, 2020.
Yeah. When
they shut down Trump. Instead of a little Twitter network can shut down Trump, there's something really going on in this world. And so my suspicions became more coalesced, into beliefs. Yeah. I just want to introduce you who we're talking to. If we get censored, you know why. It's Chris Martinson's fault here.
My fault.
But we could have joined forces on this whole thing because there's a relationship between the eyedropper with debt and COVID. That's my opinion. I don't think it's a. And one last thing, I was in Africa in July of this year, last year, 2021, and I heard of Omicron. It was already coming out.
Oh, interesting.
And I was going, another virus coming out, and then it pops up on Thanksgiving. I'm going, this is really quite interesting here. So I call it a pandemic of fear. And everybody's just separate. We're at each other's throats. So we're going to go into, when we come back with Chris, what he's doing about it, some of the characters that are rising up to fight back, like I write my Capitalist Manifesto in protest and all this, because there's certain number of us will fight back. And unfortunately, we're no longer the United States of America. We're now the divided states of America. And I think that was the whole purpose anyway. So when we come back, we'll continue on with my friend, Dr. Chris Martenson. Welcome back. Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. Today we're doing a very high-risk show with my great friend, Dr. Chris Martenson, and we're talking, I said earlier, Chris and I started in finance, but we're shifting over to the relationship between money and COVID. But now we're talking to Dr. Chris Martenson, and we're going to find out how people are reacting to it. But would you mind going over that thing about the gain of function? What does that mean?
Yeah, so I've been tracking this a long time. So my first video I put out was May of 2020, where I said, hey, look at the genetic structure of this coronavirus, this COVID-19 virus, the SARS-CoV-2. And when we look at it, it looks manipulated to me, and it looks like it came out of a lab, and there's a bunch of reasons for that, and I've got whole programs on that. But I was positive about that. Of course, I got called a conspiracy theorist, and I got shut down, all kinds of things. And then it was a year later, finally the media was like, well, maybe we know about this. So here's what we know. We know that there was a FOIA request, and we got Anthony Fauci's emails out, right? And on January 29th, 2020, he's blasting out these emails to people saying, hey, we got to get our arms around this. Oh, no, this looks like, we got to control the narrative. The interesting part is when he sent these emails out saying we have to say that this came from nature, not from a lab, he involved all these other people in the world, top virologists, right? Christian Andersen from the Cripps Institute, Marian Koopsman from who's Dutch, a German guy, Christian Drosten, all these top virologists, right? Nobody from the NIH. They have thousands of scientists. He didn't tap one of them. And so they went...
the NIH, that's just...
Yeah, National Institutes of Health, which, he's head of NIAID, but Collins was in on this. But that's it. And so we know from these emails that they were all talking about it. What we can't tell you is what they were talking about because they're all blanked out. They have these different FOIA exclusions. B4 is to prevent you from hearing personal identifying information. B5 is for this other reason. Anyways, all these B4, B5, B6 exceptions, all gray. And even people like sitting congressmen and senators, U.S. senators, are unable to see what was in those emails because Fauci, a career bureaucrat, is just standing saying, oh, no, you can't see this stuff. So we don't know what was in these emails, but we know for a fact that they were talking about how they could marginalize anybody out there who was talking about this being anything other than coming from a natural source. Now, China had a strong, compelling interest to show this came from a natural source. Within a month of that, China had sequenced and tested 80,000 separate animal samples because they were desperate. Like, can we show this came from a bat or a civet or a pangolin or a bear? They didn't care. They tested everything, and they couldn't find this in any other species in a way that would signify it came from those species. Because if you saw the movie Contagion with Dustin Hoffman, right, the whole thing is who's patient zero? Nobody was interested in patient zero. That's when I became concerned. Like I knew this came from a lab because nobody was talking about it. Nobody was asking any questions. There was no intrepid New York Times reporter asking the WHO officials, have we identified patient zero? We know this came from a lab and the key signature. If we can talk about this, this is okay because we're going to talk about this little tiny thing. It's just 4 amino acids long in the coronavirus, in the spike protein. Is called the furin cleavage site. It's a thing. A furin is a protease. It's a thing you put into if you're a researcher and you want to make something more deadly, give it a gain of function. So we've done the same thing. We've put those same cleavage sites into influenzas. That was the thing that got the whole gain of function stopped back in 2014. They said, look, we're not doing this because somebody had put that little thing into an influenza, and they made a killer bug. If that thing had ever gotten out, like 20% death.
That was like putting a V8 in a Volkswagen.
Yeah, it's literally putting yeah, exactly. Or a bullet in a gun.
Yeah.
The gun's okay, but it's really a lot more lethal with a bullet, right? So they put this site in, right? Somebody did. And that was the smoking gun. So when I put out that first video in May of 2020, I put it right up there, like any journalist only ask this one question: where did this furin cleavage site come from? Now, this got really dark for me just a month ago, and somebody inside of a system was checking this stuff out and sent me the sequence that coded for that. So the way this works is you have these little pieces of RNA, the 4 different nucleotides, and it codes for that furin cleavage site. He said, here's the thing. When you go into the system, which has all the genetic codes of everything in the world, it's the BLAST system scientists use all the time. He went in and he searched it, and he only found that exact sequence in 2 places. One was in an obscure bacterium that didn't have anything to do with viruses. And the second was it shows up in about 12 separate Moderna patents starting in 2015. That exact sequence. It's very, very rare.
Now we're definitely going to get a drone strike. No, because I was just watching the news, Pfizer and Moderna made the most money.
Yeah.
And always follow the money.
Always, but this should have been like, this is a legit question. And so where was the New York Times? Where is any inquiry on this? Like, that's a legit question. Like, can you explain why? So here's the math on this. To get that, since it's 19 nucleotides long and there's 4 different nucleotides, the math says there's a 1 in 283 billion chance of coming on that sequence accidentally, randomly. 1 in 283 billion. Your chance of winning the Powerball is like 50 times higher, right? It's so, but that sequence, it like somebody ought to be asking the question saying, okay, it's just a question. How'd that get there? Do we know, right? So there's a lot going on here where, again, there's just a lot of coincidences that don't smell right. And of course, it doesn't smell right to me that Fauci, a bureaucrat, gets to shield his email substance from sitting elected officials.
That
doesn't feel right.
And they also, because it's Fox News, you got to take it with a grain of salt. They call him the richest bureaucrat in history,
I think Pelosi's giving him a run for money when she's elected.
But this is kind of the point, because I met Chris more on the finance side and all this. If you understand the stock market, I was just talking to my doctor who gave me hydroxychloroquine, whatever it is. And another guy gave me that ivermectin.
Yeah.
And I said, why are they doing this? And all of a sudden it's a finance answer. For a stock price to go up, you need a new drug.
Mm-hmm.
And so by coming out so they censor basically the hydroxychloroquine. They produce these 2 new vaccines. The stock price goes through the roof.
Yeah, and the whole pharma industry was having trouble because the big major drugs had sort of been found, right? Antibiotics and all this. And they were down to like these really weird orphan drugs where, only a few thousand people get the syndrome, and then they have to charge $400,000 for a dose of it, whatever, right? So their model was really starting to
die, right?
Yeah, over time, and that's okay. Maybe that's okay because we'd figured out how to, we'd
get people healthy.
Yeah, as humans, we'd figured this out, and that's good. Like it should be okay that an industry takes itself out of business over time, right? I'm okay with that. They weren't okay with that, and so, you know what? I'm okay. If Pfizer says they want to try and make money, that's okay. But what's not okay is when the people who are supposed to be regulating them are actually not doing that and just helping them. So here's what we know. Pfizer ran some trials, really shoddily run on the vaccine itself. And then the last thing we heard is the FDA told a judge that they want 75 years to be able to release that data to the American people.
Jesus.
They reviewed it in 108 days. But they want 75 years. The year 2096 is when they wanted to release that. Now, a judge just came out and said, no, you have to release 18,500 pages a month, but it's still like 90 days that it's going to take us to begin to see this. That's okay. I'll guarantee you when we get in there, we're going to find things out where we're going to go, what were these regulators doing or not doing? And the answer is going to be really disappointing. So Pfizer gets to make money. They can try and cut corners, but our regulators ought not to have been doing that. But this is a story that people who, watch the CFTC not regulate or be able to see like skullduggery in the silver market, or watching the SEC not understand how hedge funds are like gaming meme stocks or whatever. It's just the whole thing is just one big story now.
All JP Morgan suppressed silver and all that other stuff. It goes on all the time.
Yeah, no, they get their wrist slapped, and then nothing happens. I still watch the same 2:00 in the morning silver raids.
You're out here. So people are fighting back right now. There's a mass movement going. So what's happening for your? What do you see happening?
Well, this has been one of the greatest. I'm really excited actually at this point in time, and because we're finding out who the real moral giants were, and who you can trust, and people are finally waking up, and I think that's a good thing because, as I mentioned, we have these big fourth turning institutional failures. It's time to reset this thing a little bit. I have a different reset in mind than the Davos crowd because it's time for we've seen these protests all over the place, hundreds of thousands in Melbourne, Germany, France. It's time for people in the United States, I think, we got to get off our butts and get out in public. I have an event I do every year, a virtual event. And so that's our yearly seminar. And so that's going to be January 29th and 30th. So if people want to...
How do they attach on to it?
Our website URL, which I can say, which is easy, is PEAK, P-E-A-K 2022.
P-E-A-K.
P-E-A-K 2022.events. You just type that in and it'll bring you over to our page. But it's really cool. I got Brett Weinstein talking this year. Got some of the COVID docs out there who are going to talk about actual treatments that people can have. Because here's the best part. To this day, your doctor, if you have 80% of the doctors in this country, will still tell you if you walk in with COVID today, they'll say, oh, go home, take some aspirin, get plenty of fluids. Are you kidding me? Right? So there's lots of things people can do, and I think they need to know about it. And I'm sure you know about them, of course, but more people than know about them need to know. And by the way, anybody listening, if your doctor says that, you got a bad doctor, get a different one.
So it's an interesting time in world history. And I'm glad you and I have been friends all these years, and we started in finance, but it comes down to just follow the money.
Follow the money.
So thank you, Chris. Good luck to you, and keep up the good work.